Since the opening of cross-Strait economic relations in the 1990s, Taiwan and China have become more interdependent than ever before. Since 20 years ago, this relationship has intensified so much that China has replaced the US and Japan as the #1 most important trading partner for Taiwan. But I think more important than that is that this is all based on foreign direct investment. So this two-way trade is based on Taiwanese businesses investing in China and then either re-exporting or selling domestically their goods and services. And this trend has only increased, not actually vacillated. However, while this interdependence has been growing, what strikes me as very interesting as a banker on the ground, primarily working in China, was that this interdependence was growing, but Taiwan's economic policy toward China was rather inconsistent. Not only that, it vacillated in several episodes under 4 administrations on Taiwan. And this is interesting because oftentimes my American or Chinese colleague would say to me, the Taiwanese are so irrational. And Taiwanese economic policy toward China is so inconsistent, despite the fact that China is the most important opportunity, not just for Taiwan, but for the world. And Taiwanese clearly are capturing this benefit. One of the key issues, of course, of economic integration is that it may propel both economies. When we're talking about a bilateral relationship here, Taiwan and China, it may be beneficial to both economies on an aggregate level. But the real issue, of course, is that the benefits are not evenly distributed. And this is perhaps the biggest issue in cross-strait economic interdependence, that certain special groups are perceived to have gained, to have received all the gains, while many others, especially unskilled workers and young people, are not receiving the benefit. While there are many opportunities, and China continues to present itself as the biggest opportunity for Taiwan. But to manage the opportunity so that more people, a wide spectrum of Taiwanese can benefit, is a tall task. And certainly all of the past administrations have had difficulty dealing with this. Somehow I thought that through research using economic data, I thought I can definitely find the answer and answer questions by people who say, how can the Taiwanese be so irrational when Taiwan was often in the newspaper alongside stories of North Korea? And I remember answering questions by people who said, do you think the Taiwanese are more irrational than the North Koreans? Why are the Taiwanese supporting policies that are choking off investment and all the future growth that could come out of cross-strait economic cooperation? But this is how the research basically unfolded over a number of years, where I collected data, tried to understand, and my assumption was very simple. As a banker, I thought, of course, data can explain this, that the redistribution of benefits from this economic liberalization certainly is only benefiting certain groups, and so those losers of globalization, if you will, are reacting against this. It's a very simple argument of politics of trade. That has to be the explanation, especially given Taiwan's democratic institution. All special interest groups have a role in how policies are made. But after a few years, I realized the economic drivers just could not explain this. And it took me a long time to come to understand that actually in the background, there was something more important happening, unfolding, and that was a changing sense of Taiwanese identity. So I changed the focus of my research to focus on, I think, the primary driver, especially in the early stage of cross-strait economic relations, which is national identity. What has come to my attention is that there is a strengthening of a local identity, a Taiwanese identity, that has consolidated over the last 3 decades, that actually crosses ethnicity lines, crosses party lines, and most importantly, is generationally moving toward a Taiwanese identity. The younger the respondent is, all these polls show that the more strongly they identify themselves as exclusively Taiwanese, not both Taiwanese and Chinese, or exclusively Chinese. And of course, we know that this is a trend that is happening also in Hong Kong under great economic interdependence with China. The national identity that I'm talking about here is really related to two dimensions. One is, who do you think you are, what we call self-identification, and there are many polls that measure this. But the second one, of course, for Taiwanese is just as important, which is how do they see their political future? Is it independence now, independence later, status quo now, status quo forever, unification now, unification later? All of these categories, to me, meant there was support for autonomy that was growing. The two categories, which is unification now or unification later, as a group was declining and now is at a record low, just like those who say they are exclusively Chinese is at a record low, is in low single digit. And this trend, as measured from 1992 to 2014 in my book, shows a clear trend, and in 2015 and 16 this trend is unabated and has only actually gone in the same direction. So what is of course disconcerting is this is not what Beijing would like to see. And the international framework is, of course, Beijing would like Taiwanese to feel more Chinese and be more inclined to socio-economically and politically, most importantly, integrate with China. However, the end results have been the opposite. So the national identity that I looked at finally led me to the answer that I was seeking. And the answer is, of course, that actually national identity is the foundation upon which we can decide our preference for policy, whether it's economic policy or otherwise. The conclusion I reached through these years of research and interviews and realizing national identity was a key driver in the early days especially, is that, first of all, when identity is fractured or divided, debate over economic policy can be emotional and intense, and preference for extreme economic policy is very appealing. And over time, as national identity consolidates, the discussion becomes more moderate, more logical, and focus on the economic consequences and interests of the community.